This podcast may contain adult themes and strong language.
You stepped onto Busker's Corner.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Let's do this. This might be our last one. I could die, you know. I'm doing my 15th backflip, and I don't know if my legs are actually going to react or not sometimes. And that's just the reality of what we're doing. You have to bring style and energy and power, finesse, and you have to bring the full package so that you could deliver a show to these people that you're asking for their attention. It takes a lot of energy. You have to be entertaining the whole time. You have to be entertaining when you're up on the side. When the moment you're asking for attention, they're giving it to you. And if you're not giving them the attention that you're asking back for, then they're not going to give you that energy back.
Welcome to Busker's Corner podcast. I'm your host, Robert, and we'll get back to this story in a moment in an episode called Finding Yourself.
Hey there, I'm your co-host Fable, and it's definitely a bittersweet feeling as we near the end of this first season of Busker's Corner podcast. So this episode is going to be all about finding yourself. And finding yourself is all about trial and error, soul searching, rumination, and defining your purpose. So genuinely, I really want to thank you for listening and going on this journey with us as we continue to find ourselves as podcasters. On this episode, we'll hear 3 stories from 3 very different corners of the art world, all about when life events accumulate to the point where you just can't help but end up finding yourself.
Our first guest today is a multi-returning storyteller and multi-talented artist. He performs incredible dances on the street with his crew 2HC in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and publishes a comic book about the b-boy lifestyle called Once Upon a Cypher. Please welcome back b-boy Faro in a story we call Getting Down.
Before I would consider myself a b-boy, this is before I knew what the hip-hop culture was in its full aspect. I was at the state fair. I had just kind of learned how to glide. I'd been at a Halloween party. People were like, yo, this kid can get down. So all of a sudden, I just wanted to dance everywhere. At the state fair, standing in the lines, there was music playing and I was just getting down everywhere. I would kind of form a little crowd around me everywhere. I danced so much that day, I got shin splints for months. I'd never experienced that feeling in my body. That's a funny story. That would probably be the first time I ever got the feeling of what it might be to bust. Now, later on down the line, I'm like 16 or 17, and I meet Ricky Rodriguez, and he becomes my mentor, my teacher through breaking. Everybody has their own things that they want to grow up to be, but that's all I wanted to do shows with the crew. He invited me to move in with him because when in the b-boy lifestyle, I mean, at least for us, we don't have furniture in our house. So when I met Rick, his living room was an empty space so that we could train. He invited me to sleep on his floor. It was more like, if you want to learn, you're going to have to be here in Santa Fe. Now, from Española. the first time I got down with the crew on the concrete. And we were doing the show with the Lenzik, and it was during Fiesta times.
There are parades or processions on each of the 3 days. But those who take part in the parades or walk in the processions usually have more fun than the spectators. It is unusual in Santa Fe during the Fiesta to see anyone, even strangers, without some sort of costume. So if you plan to attend, you should do like the Santa Feans.
And mind you, this b-boy lifestyle is all new to me. I'm like just thrown into this mixing pot and everything is new. I'm still trying to understand the grasp of the lifestyle of breaking. We're backstage preparing for a show at the Lenzik. And as you know, the Lenzik is just a walk away from downtown. And this was during Fiesta times. We were like, oh, well, what are we going to do? I don't know. Let's just go for a walk. And all of a sudden we're walking downtown and everybody's kind of down there doing their thing. And everybody in the crew kind of looks at each other like, yo, let's get down. And Rick's like, let's do this. And, you know, I'm new to this. And I'm like, what are we about to do? We're about to get down. And I'm like, what? All right, this is cool, you know? And that was kind of my first introduction to just getting down. Back then, we didn't have a permit. We didn't ask for permission. We just got down. If you were playing music, we were going to dance to your music. If there was music being played, we were going to dance to that music. If we had music with us and someone had a radio, it didn't matter if it was a block rocker like we have now. We were just, all we needed was some music. We were about to do it. These guys were my mentors. I looked up to these guys. So for me to be on the concrete was like, wow, like it felt like I had achieved my dreams. It was the ultimate goal for me. That was everything I had aspired to. But everybody has their own things that they want to grow up to be, but that's all I wanted to do, was do shows with the crew. It was amazing. I could say that was a dream come true when the first time I got down with the crew on the concrete.
Thank you, B-Boy Faro, for sharing your story. I've seen these guys performing, and it is very often truly death-defying as they do their backflips and other dances on the concrete of the plaza.
Playing behind us now is DJ Element. For a full list of music played on this episode, please check out the show notes. Now let's get back to more true stories of finding herself.
Now for a guy who seems to be finding and refinding himself every decade. Currently, he's finding himself guiding people around Santa Fe, New Mexico in a Pedicab, which is a bike-powered taxi. And, admirably, I should mention, he is in his 70s. He is a health advocate, incredible visual artist, and a flute player, and we'll be hearing his flute throughout his story. He also has a long career in television, but we'll let him tell us about it in his own words as he guides us through his story we call a remarkable journey. Please welcome to Busker's Corner, Emmy Award-winning art director, Paul Hillman.
I'm Paul Hillman. Currently here in Santa Fe, I'm operating my own pedicab company. I've been out here in Santa Fe now probably 9 years. I worked in Manhattan for 40 years prior to coming out here. So let me start at the beginning.
Coming, going, always on the move. The people, the customs, even the places. In this restless, bustling city that is New York.
I graduated art school in 1967, and in those days, you could hit Manhattan with a portfolio and get hired. Boom, like that. They didn't tell you go to the computer and apply for the job online and no one ever responds to you. So what happened to me, I got hired at CBS Television doing graphic design for Walter Cronkite. During my years in TV, between, the Vietnam War and the Iraq War, I worked a lot in the news division and, with The View and with a few of the other shows. I've acquired a few Emmy Awards. I have a Polk Award. And then I did a lot of freelancing for a company called Global Vision. The people that ran that, his name was Danny Schechner, and he was ex-producer from 2020 at ABC. And we had what's called stringers all over the world. And what stringers are people that can call up on a moment's basis. They'll pick up a video cam and they will cover the release of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And then we take that footage and turn it into a half-hour television show that ends up on PBS. So I was their art director for 3 or 4 years. And the show that we did over there was called Rights and Wrongs with Charlene Hunter Galt.
You're watching Rights and Wrongs, the television magazine of human rights with Charlene Hunter Galt.
That was, I feel, the greatest thing I worked for in TV. We brought to television the human rights struggle that was going on all over the world on PBS, a half-week show. And from that, I had work from the UN. And then by 1990, I decided to have my own production company. And somewhere in early 93, I took Good Morning America as a big account. They kept me so busy, I put my company to sleep and I became the art director for Good Morning America over at ABC. What the hell am I doing on a pedicab? When I was 23 years old, I weighed 250 pounds. I had a 42-inch waist, and from birth, I was suffering from severe asthma. One day, I was listening to Pacifica Radio out of New York City. That's WBAI. That's where Amy Goodman came from, Rachel Maddow, all the great left-wing journalists of our time got their college education by working at WBAI in Manhattan. I kind of got my college education listening to that station also. One day, they interviewed Dick Gregory. Most people know him because he became an activist for human rights. Also, though, he was an individual in the 50s and 60s, occasionally would appear on the Ed Sullivan Show or the Merv Griffin Show or the Steve Allen Show. He was a stand-up, fat, happy comic. And little by little, he woke up the way George Carlin, became very with humor, but he could really tell some poignant stories that were politically important and socially important. When I listened to Dick's interview for an hour, and some of the things he was saying about taking responsibility for your own life into your own hands, there's no magic pill, you can't keep on going to doctors, figure out what you need to do in your life and go there. And it inspired me. I mean, he was an inspirational speaker. Then that evening, I turned on the TV and the made-for-television pilot for Kung Fu, starring David Carradine, came on. So I watched this TV pilot, and man, I really woke up. Watching the character that David Carradine played, his name was Grasshopper.
As quickly as you can, snatch the pebble from my hand. When you can take the pebble from my hand, It will be time for you to leave.
He was brought up in the Shaolin Monastery. And when he was ready to go out into the world and leave the monastery, he had to go through an extreme physical ordeal. Anyway, the next day I became a vegan. I don't know, the combination of things that night, and maybe it was information that was buried inside me, ancient wisdom, but it unleashed it. And I knew I had to become a vegetarian. And in a year, I lost 100 pounds. When I hit 175 for the first time in my life, I started hitting the high school track. Boom, all of a sudden, as my weight peeled off, I'm running 12 miles a day. And I never looked back.
Time for you to leave.
Around 1973, I started bicycling and bicycle racing. When I accidentally stumbled upon one of the other pedicab dudes about, good 6 years ago here in Santa Fe, or maybe 7 years ago. That was when I was 69. And I asked him about pedicabbing. It seemed like it would be a comfort zone for me since I did so much bicycling for 10 years. And it was funny because the first day in the parking garage where the bikes are all stored, I figured you get on a pedicab, 3 wheels. I can't even fall off the damn thing. What could possibly happen? So the owner of the company is there, and I'm on the pedicab for the first time. And there's cars around us because it's the La Fonda's indoor parking garage. I'm on the pedicab, and what do? The pedicab takes its head on me like a horse when you can't pull the reins back and the horse wants to go where it wants to go. Well, the pedicab went where it wanted to go, and that was into the rear bumper of a Mercedes. So I got hired. And then a couple of years later, I ended up managing that company. And then during COVID, we bought, me and my friend Michael decided, let's get a couple of bikes. I brought my Flute down to the plaza, and when I didn't have people as passengers, I would play my flute, just practicing. It was very tricky in the beginning. I felt a little intimidated because I was new to the flute, like 6 years ago. I had listened to Robert Mirabal, Carlos Nakai, and then when I came here, of course, Johnny Olson. And one day, one of the artists came up to me. She stuck a $5 bill in my back pocket. And I took it out and gave it back to her. I said, I'm not busking. I'm just practicing. She insisted. And then later, someone told me, if a beautiful woman from the Pueblo gives you a gift, you accept the gift. It's serious. And that gave me a little encouragement because what she said was that my playing sounded very much like the music she grew up on in the Pueblo, and it was making her very nostalgic. A few weeks later, she crafted for me a copper bracelet to wear. And the flattened out end of the copper bracelet, how you can put a jeweler's stamp with your initials. The stamp had a little image of Copapelli. And you know who Copapelli is. In native lore, he was the original Mr. Flute guy, So that gave me more encouragement. So this is what I do. I no longer feel I'm embarrassing myself because in the beginning I would struggle to be able to play for 20 seconds because it's all spontaneous. Now I can play for 10 minutes and just know what to do. It's become very intuitive. So I play a lot on the plaza. I'll close my eyes while I'm playing and I'll play for 5 minutes. And I just soar somewhere. And when I'm done, I open up my eyes and I look to my left and I look to my right and I go, shit, I'm still here. Because you really feel like you've been transformed. you've left your worldly body and you've gone somewhere with the flute. It's amazing. And it's just such a cool thing, you know? It's a piece of wood with a bunch of holes drilled in it. And I blow my breath into it. And the flute takes me on this remarkable journey. To be honest with you, I never, ever deliberately attempt to busk while I'm playing the flute. The bike is my gig. The flute, I'm out there just because I love it.
Thank you, Paul Hillman, for such an inspiring story. See, everybody, not everything on Busker's Corner is drugs, cops, and fighting. If you're ever in Santa Fe, stop by the plaza and hook a ride with Paul on his Pedicab. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's happy to share.
You can find links to see Paul's amazing artwork and get the lowdown about how to book a pedicab ride with him in our show notes. And while you're there, I know you'll be happy to find all of our other artists' links and contact info as well. Now it's time for our final story on Busker's Corner, all about finding yourself.
Our next guest is a returning guest with one of my favorite stories on this first season of Busker's Corner. He is a singer-songwriter who's played in many bands, but he is also a recording engineer and producer in Santa Fe and West Texas. You will hear his original music playing behind him. Please welcome back Bill Palmer in a story called Terms and Conditions.
1, 2, 3, 4. So years ago in Austin in the mid-90s, I was working at this grocery store, this little small kind of specialty. We had some organic food and a nice beer selection. This is like 94, 95. I'm Bill Palmer. I have a recording studio in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm a producer and engineer and a songwriter and a carpenter and a barbecuist and various sundries. And I was the produce boy, and I met the guy who was the meat cutter. He was a few years older, and he was from Texas, but he had lived in LA and had come back to Texas, and he was a songwriter, and he gave me his cassette. And it was really good, and I'd been working on these 4-track things and gave it to him. And so we got to talking about playing music. And so I went over to his house, and we started playing songs, and we really hit it off immediately. And then he had this other guy who lived down the hall from him, who was an old friend, who's still a dear friend of mine to this day. He came by, and he was also a great musician. And next thing you know, all three of us are kind of sitting around and trading songs, and we decided we wanted to put a band together with 3 singers. We didn't really have all the ingredients yet. And my little brother still plays with drums with me. He was like 17 and he wasn't really into it. We were like, hey man, come sit in and play drums. So we got this gig at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, just down from the Capitol. And they gave us every Saturday night, and we could do pretty much what we wanted in there. And they would give us free beer and coffee. And so we liked that. And so we started going in there. And it started getting crowded. Like we had a thing, and the next thing you know, a banjo player walks in one night, and he joined the band right there on the spot. And then an old friend of mine came in with percussion. The band was called we named the band the Sharecroppers. So at night, the coffee shop had to shut down at 10 o'clock. And so we would just spill out onto the street and sit out on the street and play, which that was really the gig. That became the gig. The coffee shop was just the way we could kind of get drunk and stuff before we spilled out on the street. And the next thing you know, on Saturday nights, there would be like 100, 200 people standing around us who were coming and like parked down the street and like walked to this thing that we had started to do. And I remember people with drumsticks, like playing the street signs, and all these musicians started coming around, and rappers would come in and join us. And it was just this big ordeal. And it would always end up just turning into this sort of psychedelic sort of rhythm drum section jam where we would just leave the songs behind and just kind of wail till 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in downtown Austin. I don't know if you could even do something like that now, but it made the band. And at that, we went from that coffee shop gig into having some of the most prestigious gigs in the whole city with a full-on management and everything. We were kind of these oddball characters that a lot of people were sort of afraid to touch, people in the industry. And so like we would never get into South by Southwest, the big music festival down there, but yet we would be on the 6 o'clock news for South by Southwest, and like all the celebrities would be at our show, and like we'd have the biggest party in town. But we were sort of like always rejected by the inner circles of things because we had these long beards, long hair. It was in the 90s. We had a banjo player. That was kind of before the banjo came back into fashion. We were one of the early people to do that. And it was just because we were nuts, But there's this festival in Texas called the Kerrville Folk Festival. And we tried so hard to get into this festival, and it's a wonderful festival. I think it used to be 3 weeks, and it's a camp out kind of a thing, and there's music around the fires at night. And they never would let us in. Like we were just a little too raggedy for them. We would go and we would perform in the campgrounds, and we would walk around and busk. And it's street performing. It just in that, we're walking down the roads and the trails of this big festival grounds, playing music for people. And we would just have like 100 people following us around everywhere we went. We would just go through campgrounds and pass through. And I know that must have been kind of a scene for some of the organizers of that festival to see that a lot of what they had on the stage was actually quite boring and unexciting. And then here we are walking around out here really causing a ruckus. And that was kind of a neat feeling. That's one of the cool things about street performance is that you're kind of outside of the accepted realm of gigging and performing, and you're able to really do things on your own terms, and you don't have to dress a certain way, and you don't have to put on appearances, and also just the interaction with people. Like when you come down off of the stage, it's like there's this sort of separation that if you have any skill, you learn how to sort of breach it and really get to talk to people. But when you're a street performer, you're like right down on the level with everybody, and we're all kind of in it together kind of feeling. And that's the way that Kerrville Folk Festival thing was for the Sharecroppers. And it really helped us succeed. We did, a lot of really cool things. We ended up going to New York City and doing these showcases for all these people. Getting offered like the biggest record deals that were going on at the time. We broke up under the stress of that because the way that the industry was kind of pitting us against each other, it was pretty terrible what I experienced at that time in my life. This great band of young guys kicking ass just to get sort of like sliced and diced by these money people because they wanted us to cut our hair and wanted us, to only have one singer, and we want to send you to Nashville. So they're offering us all this money, but we didn't capitalize on it because we didn't really like the terms and conditions. And so when you think of things in that sense, those nights out at Kerrville Folk Festival was really our pinnacle and like the best nights of our life. You know? That was the success. That was the moment. And I always thought that it was those street performances is what gave us that magic thing that we were then able to sort of take in these other directions.
Looking out across the fields, she can see his lonely eyes in the hills. She says his name, she knows his heart. Can't help but wonder why she tore it all apart. Tore it all apart. Tore it all apart.
Thank you, Bill Palmer, for telling us your story. It's amazingly weird how they won't let artists just be artists. They gotta get their greasy little fingers in everything. I feel for Bill and other artists who have been at odds with the system, as I had a similar experience in the fine art world before I became a busker. And that concludes this episode called Finding Yourself, with a story of realizing your dream, a story of creating your own reality, and a story of keeping it real.
It's hard to believe that we're finding ourselves at the end of another episode and that there's only one more left to go in season 1. If you're a street performer of any variety and you have stories you'd like to share on Busker's Corner, please do. Let us know through social media or email us.
Thank you to all the people who shared their story on this episode of Busker's Corner podcast. You can find all of their contact information in the show notes, and we hope you will support them.
We hope that you've enjoyed our podcast so far, and if you have, please help us tell the world about BCP. Please follow us on YouTube and join us on our social media pages. We really appreciate it.
Join us next time for the season finale, where we will hear more epic true stories from the world of street performance. But for now, you're stepping off Busker's Corner.